Okay, we're going to go through grading the princess seams, the darts, and the facings on our princess seam dress. The handout from last week has been updated into week 7 in Brightspace. It has some new slides on here, just walking through generally how we're thinking about grading the princess seam at different locations, and a few new tools that we are going to use to help us. Okay, so we're going to start at the hem where the princess seam intersects. So this point here needs to, 1, extend all the way to the hem on every size. That's an X movement. And for the Y movement, we have to make a decision. So typically with style lines on a piece or small parts, so pockets or flies, zippers, plackets, yokes, I typically like to look at where it's falling on the body, how much in terms of the entire proportion that small part or seam is taking up. So in this case, it's pretty simple. The seam is essentially splitting the front and back in half. Not perfectly in half, but you can kind of think of it as when we grade with our slash lines, if this grade here at this point is 1/4 of an inch, we maybe would have 2 slash lines. One here that's 1/8 of an inch, one here that's 1/8 of an inch. Therefore, our princess seam in the Y direction would get 1/8 of an inch, which is half of what our side seam would get. Okay, so we're going to take a look at what our side seam grade is, and we're looking at the Y. Okay, so we have 1/4 going down and 3/8 going up. So we're going to take half of this, 1/8, and half of this, 3/16, and that's the Y grade we're going to apply to our princess seam. And we're going to apply that Y grade all the way through. If you recall, our side seam grades parallel, so the same Y grade is applied at our sweep, our hip, our waist, and our bust. So we're going to do the same thing here. So the first thing I'm going to do, because I need an X and a Y grade here, I'm just going to copy. When you hit copy, you're just copying the whole grade rule. You're not copying X or Y, you're copying both. And we're going to copy from this point to the bottom of the princess seam. Okay, so now the next thing we do is change the Y. So I'm going to go to Edit Delta. I'm going to click and drag into this end point of my princess seam. And I'm going to essentially divide these in half. Now, when we're editing within Edit Delta, we have to start at the base size as long as we're in base up down incremental. So I'm going to start here where my break changes, and I'm going to type in -0.125, and I'm going to go up. So I'm splitting these numbers in half. And then I'm going to start at the base size again and work my way down. Okay, I'm going to say it right. Next, I'm going to copy this Y rule. And I'm going to copy it from this end of the princess seam to this end. Now, nothing changes in terms of the movement of the line, but I'm just, by doing this, changing this point that's a triangle to a diamond, which is a great point. That way, when I'm going and copying, I can copy from that rule. So now I need to put the grade rule on my fisheye dart. So I'm going to copy from here. I'm only working on the Y right now. And I'm going to drag, I'm going to start at the top of this dart. If you notice, when I start dragging, the top of this fisheye dart is one line, and the bottom of the fisheye dart is its own separate line. I'm going to do one at a time, because each line is going to have its own endpoint at these 2 ends. Okay, so notice that just this line moves. Then I'm going to copy here and paste into from this line. I'm dragging along this bottom line, middle point, and apex. Okay. All right. I can then also grab this Y rule and put it at the end of this dart, my bust dart. Okay. All right, so I'm good with my Y rules here. Now I need to do my X's. So the fisheye dart is centered on my waist, and my waistline is moving. So I need my waist dart to move with my waist placement. So I'm going to take copy X, and I'm going to copy from this waist point, which is 5, and I'm going to go ahead and paste it into the middle of my dart. And then I'm going to paste this into the bottom of my dart and to the other bottom of my dart. Okay. So basically now the bottom half of this fisheye dart is not growing, it's just shifting with my waistline. Lastly, I need to copy this X rule that I put here, and I need to put it at the end of this line. Notice that on the smaller and the larger sizes, this princess line is not connecting with my dart. So all I have to do is copy that rule from the end of my fisheye dart to the end of my princess seam line. Okay, and now everything is connected and moving together. For my bust dart, I'm going to use a tool here called Specify Length. If you remember on the graded spec page, do I have it open? Let's see. On my graded spec page, I have a front princess seam placement and armhole. And you'll notice here, this is not a great view, but you'll notice that it's grading 1/8 of an inch. So it's grading the same Y movement as the rest of my princess seam, 1/8 for the smaller sizes and 3/16 for the larger sizes. So I'm going to use this tool called Specify Length. Specify Length works in a way in which you specify which end point of a line you want to grade, and then the system will grade it for you based on what you want that line to measure for every size. So I'm going to go to Specify Length. I'm going to choose this line, and then I'm going to choose this endpoint, right? This endpoint already has a grade point that I have given it. This one is the one that I want to grade. Okay, and it's going to bring up this chart, and the chart is going to give me 2 options. I can either tell the system what I want the length of that line to be, or I can give it a growth amount. Okay, it looks like it kind of already is set. So I want minus 1/8 of an inch and 3/16 for all of these. Okay, so I'm not using a length here because I know that my base size doesn't measure exactly 2.5. If this was maybe a rectangular pocket or something that was measuring perfectly, I could also just enter in the measurements that I wanted here. I'm going to say OK, and then I'm going to copy this rule to this rule. And in case I didn't go through it in my last video, this rule, these ends of this dart already had the Y rule from my across front. So I had already done copy Y from the 7 rule to these 2 points. So that's why all I had to do was change the X here. Okay, so then the last thing I want to do is copy the X rule from this point to the apex of my dart. Okay, so part of that is because I want this dart to not change its width, right? I don't want the depth of my dart to change. So whatever X I put here, I then put it here, and now I'm putting it here. So my dart is essentially just shifting. And then lastly, I want to copy that X rule, right? These both already have the Y that I want. I'm going to copy the X from the bottom of the apex of my bust dart to the top edge of my fisheye dart. And then I'm going to do this again, but drag in from the bottom of my fisheye dart. Okay, so I'm looking to see that all of these points are connecting, right? So what you'll see here, the result of this is that my whole princess seam is going to shift 1/8 of an inch or 3/16 of an inch, which is half of my whole. So when I split these pieces apart, this piece is getting a little bit smaller or larger, and this piece is getting a little bit smaller or larger. The result is the full circumference grade that I gave to the outside of the piece. Okay. For the lengths, this dart is not growing or shrinking from the waist down, it's just shifting. The dart is growing and shrinking at the top edge. If you notice, the distance between waist and the top of the dart is much smaller for your yellow size than it is for your aqua size. Okay. Lastly, here we can copy, just one-for-one copy from the front to the back, because our movements are going to be essentially the same. So I'm copying the grade rule. I'm going to go from the bottom to the top. So from that point to the bottom of this princess seam, from top of the princess seam to top of this princess seam, from bottom of this dart. Now I know that my dart is all grading the same from the waist down, so I can go ahead and grab all of these points and then just one more on the bottom of this dart. Oops. Okay. Then I'm going to grab the top of the dart and paste here. Okay, and then one more time, top of the dart, pasting to the top of this dart. All right. Now I have this princess seam that I need to worry about, so I'm going to copy from the top of this fisheye dart and paste into the bottom of this princess seam so that that princess seam moves with my fisheye dart. Okay. The back yoke seam we have to update. On the spec, we had created our 7 grade rule, assuming that our cross front doesn't move, the placement of the cross front doesn't move. But my back yoke seam placement does grade. It grades 1/8 of an inch per size. So right now, my distance from high point shoulder to back yoke seam does not change. I want it to change 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so if this grade rule at high point shoulder is 1/4, and I want this difference to be 1/8, then I need to grade this 1/4 minus 1/8, which is 1/8. So I'm going to go to Edit Delta, and I'm going to drag into this back yoke seam, and I'm going to change these to 1/8 of an inch, working from the center base size out. Okay. I'm going to copy the X rule from this point to this point. And I'm also going to copy it from this internal line to that grade point on my piece. Okay. And then lastly, I'm going to copy that X rule from this new back yoke seam to my top of my princess seam. All right. Now the last thing we have to do in terms of grading is our facings. The facings were offset or bunny clicked from specific points. So every point that we bunny clicked from or offset from, we're just going to copy the grade. Okay? So I'm copying grade rule, not X or Y, just the full grade rule. I'm copying from here to here. I'm copying from the top of my dart, oops, to the end point of this facing line. I'm copying from the top of this dart to the end point of this facing line. I'm copying from this neck drop to this center front point of my facing. I'm copying from this side seam point to my facing. Oops. And lastly, I'm going to copy from this back yoke seam armhole intersection to the top of my facing. And we're going to save this. And that concludes our grading.